Hello everyone and welcome. This week I'm in Libreville, Gabon for this new edition of Business Africa. On our show today we take you to Kenya to follow progress made in the circular economy, and on the other side of the continent to Nigeria, which has just elected its new president. But first, let's get on with the show with our top stories today. Almost 10 years of existence and 10,000 tons of electronic waste recycled. WE is one of Kenya's new champions of the circular economy.
To date, we have done over 10,000 tons of e-waste that we've properly disposed. So that's to save the planet over 14,400 tons of CO2. We've served over, I think, 8,000 different customers across Africa.
A look back at the Dakar to Feed Africa Summit, which aims to change the game through technological innovation and young agripreneurs.
Today, researchers at the Senegalese Institute of Agricultural Research have developed varieties that can be grown even during the rain season within 3 months. So there is no need to irrigate, just with rain. So these are resilient varieties.
Couscous galore in Casablanca. The CPI lab allows producers to test recipes on a miniature production line.
Thanks to our supervision system, we can of course do our tests and alter all the numbers, all the parameters of our recipes, what we call the WE recipes, and directly place them as the template into the industrial process.
Since 2014, the world has produced almost 10 million tons of additional e-waste. This is particularly worrying in Africa. Countries such as Nigeria and Ghana are suffocating under imports of second-hand electronic equipment, 25% of which is already unusable upon arrival. In Kenya, only 10% of electronic waste is recycled. In Nairobi, our journalist Jefferson Kahinu visited a social enterprise specialized in this circular economy. The aim is to give new life to used machines or collect precious materials from them. Take a look.
Kenya is estimated to generate over 50 tons of e-waste annually, and only 1% of it is properly recycled. The pandemic saw more people working from home, increasing imports of electronics, both new and second-hand. Albeit, e-waste management remains a big headache for the country.
So when you have a huge appetite for consuming electronics, there's also equivalent electronic waste that will be disposed.
The carbon footprint of electronics is estimated to be about 3.7% of global greenhouse emissions. Recycling e-waste from landfill reduces methane emissions, which are 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide.
To date, we have done over 10,000 tons of e-waste that we've properly disposed. So that's to save the planet over 14,400 tons of CO2. We've served over, I think, 8,000 different customers across Africa, whereby we are providing them a very safe alternative to existing traditional ways of disposing electronic waste.
The long-term management of e-waste requires companies to have extended producer responsibility to manage the growing number of waste.
But there's still a mindset issue, you know. People don't understand how bad it is. The same way you have people who don't understand how bad climate change is for the planet.
Africa has been used to dump e-waste from other international countries, but some countries, like Kenya, have set up legislation to stop it. Not many African countries have the mechanism of recycling e-waste due to the high cost of machinery required to start similar projects.
We still have countries in Africa who don't have a solution. But where will they take the e-waste? But as a company, we've been establishing partnerships with other African countries. We've set up, or rather we have footprint in more than 15 countries in the continent, whereby we're also building their capacities as we center grows and expands. So some of these countries we have direct operations, other countries we have set up partnerships with players in those countries.
More efforts are needed after the East African Community, EAC, unanimously decided to prohibit the dumping of e-waste in the region in 2021.
We're largely importers, which means we don't dictate the standards of technological equipment that is coming into our countries, which means we have higher waste because the life cycles of these products are shorter. So whereas maybe in the West you'd have a product serving or reaching its end of life after 20 years, here it's taking maybe 5-7 years or even less in some instances. And that generates and exacerbates the amount of waste creation.
Importers and dealers of electronic devices will be liable for treating the e-waste generated, the ESC ruled. This will take the prices north, with most imports coming from Australia, Japan, China and Canada.
Achieving circularity with e-waste is possible. The challenge we have in Africa, which Kenya is also one of the countries in Africa, is that we don't control a lot of production systems that are producing a lot of our equipment. Be it the cars we are driving, be it the television sets we are watching, be it the washing machines we are using, the mobile phones we are using are not even within our control in terms of actual manufacture. And so the challenge lies here. Even with extraction or recovery of useful material from e-waste, we still have to export it to the countries that are producing this equipment for us. Whereas, if we had production lines in country, we'd actually be able to consume that material locally, circulate it back into the system, and require very little virgin material that is needed to top up based on whatever losses we'd have made in terms of the recycling process. But the challenge is we are not in control of our production systems.
Even though e-waste is hazardous and harmful, there are a few situations where it has helped Africa by creating jobs. Currently, Africa's informal e-waste recycling and collection industry brings in between 22 cents and $9 per person per day.
The head of state of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, has succeeded his Senegalese counterpart Macky Sall as president of the African Union since February 18th. Among his priorities will be the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. The ponderosity of the mechanism to concretely develop trade flows is irritating, even if 46 countries have finally ratified the treaty. The new president has called on states to create the necessary conditions to stimulate intra-African trade further. And one of the major challenges that will also feature in the mandate of the new chairperson of the African Union is that of debt. Several countries, including Zambia, have defaulted on their repayments, and more difficulties are expected this year. The new chairman of the African Union, Azali Assoumani, has stated his belief in the need to cancel African debt. Private creditors seem ready to make an effort. Ethiopian government bondholders recently offered Addis Ababa to extend their maturities from 5 to 6 years to avoid default. Increasing agricultural production, infrastructures and developing local production adapted to climate change. This is the continent's roadmap. At the recent Dakar 2 summit, Feed Africa, Food Sovereignty and Resilience, the objective was to find solutions to the food insecurity linked to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Our journalist Lionel Koshua followed the summit of African leaders and development actors invited by the African Development Bank and the Senegalese government. Take a look.
34 African heads of state, many development partners, as well as various players from the private sector were all invited here in Dakar to define a joint action plan to unleash Africa's food production potential. With the Ukrainian crisis and rising food prices, food insecurity continues to plague Africa. In fact, 80% of the continent's basic food needs are imported. Africa is therefore paying a heavy price, sometimes by up to 40%. Consequently, the most affected are small-scale farmers, who are quite numerous in Africa. The global rise in fertilizer prices, linked to the increase in gas prices, an essential resource in the manufacture of fertilizers, has doubled on the international markets. This directly impacts the costs of these producers, since they import 80% of their fertilizers from abroad. The same is true for livestock farmers. Their prices are soaring too, as Mariam Alamdou, an agripreneur in Dakar, explains. Today, the chicken we used to buy for 2,000 CFA francs costs now 3,000 CFA francs because the inputs have all increased. This makes it difficult to do business because most of the medicines are imported. And of course, the cost of freight, cost of transport goes up, the product price will eventually go up and it won't be bearable for the farmers. The emergence of COVID in 2019 with its negative outcomes on the African economy as well as the effects of climate change on agricultural production have also aggravated the situation. Faced with these facts, the African Development Bank and the African Union, under the initiative of Senegalese President Macky Sall, have decided to take action. For this summit, they have indeed mobilized many African heads of state, investors, private sector leaders and development actors to collaborate to set up food and agricultural supply agreements. The objectives for each country are to increase agricultural production and infrastructure and develop local production adapted to climate and climate change. Senegal, the host country, seems to be on the right track. Researchers of the ISRA, the Senegalese Institute of Agricultural Research, have successfully developed climate-resilient rice varieties, the country's most important food crop. The TAT Rice Compact, or Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation program, financed by the African Development Bank, has enabled its large-scale demonstration, as well as the promotion of this first variety of hybrid rice launched in 2017 by ISRA in Senegal as ISRIAS 9.
Today, researchers at the Senegalese Institute of Agricultural Research have developed varieties that can be grown even during the rainy season within 3 months. So there is no need to irrigate, just with rain. So these are resilient varieties. Some are drought and cold resistant. They have developed varieties that are resistant to cold.
Achieving food security and producing from farm to fork means that an entire ecosystem must be changed and adapted to the reality on the ground. Fortunately, successes in this field seem to come from both the youth as well as technological innovations. The African Development Bank has clearly understood the opportunities and have been supporting these young African agripreneurs with the Enable Youth Initiative, a vast agribusiness financing and training program. In 5 years, $500 million have already been invested.
75% of the African population is below the age of 35. So whatever investments we're going to make in agriculture or in whichever sector, we have to involve the youth. Secondly, new technologies are coming into agriculture, digitalization, use of drones, big data, and the youth are very much ready to adopt these new technologies more than the older farmers.
Ikenan Zewi, a young Nigerian agripreneur, benefited from Enable Youth support by winning the AgriPitch competition in 2020. He has since managed to raise $7 million in investment. He tells us today how his Made in Nigeria innovations have helped improve the agribusiness sector in his country.
We develop both proprietary hardware, a nut cracking technology for the palm oil value chain called Kraken, as well as software to coordinate our operations, both geospatially and on the ground, handling microtransactions with smallholder farmers. Our mission is to industrialize food processing in Africa by bringing food processing technology closer to smallholder farmers so that they can add value to their crops to prevent post-harvest loss and costly logistics before then transporting those food ingredients to fast-moving consumer good manufacturers.
After only 2 days of negotiations, the results are promising. Development partners have announced $30 billion in investments, including a $10 billion envelope from the African Development Bank for the implementation of national pacts over the next 5 years. On the private sector front, OCP, the world's leading exporter of phosphate fertilizers, announced a donation of 4 million tons of fertilizer to the African continent. These successes should put the continent on the path to food self-sufficiency.
So the African leadership came. So there's political leadership. That's the very first reason. The second reason, the development partners came and pledged support. And then also, we also saw the private sector coming and to say, this is what needs to be done to fix agriculture in Africa. So it's been a huge success. So out of this, we're going to have investment projects, and we're also going to have accountability. We want the countries to be able to say, we are going to ensure this happens if you give us the resources. So this has been a huge success. And in another 2 years, we should see some real big change in food supply on the African continent.
With a strong political commitment from heads of state and governments agreeing to allocate 10% of national budgets to agriculture, this summit should be a turning point for the continent. With 65% of the world's remaining arable land, Africa also has the potential to feed 9 billion people by 2050.
Welcome to the second part of our show. We now turn to West Africa, to Nigeria, where voters were called to the polls late last month to choose their new president. The succession of outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari was held against the backdrop of a huge cash crisis. At stake, the change of new Naira banknotes. This intense cash shortage has had serious consequences for the informal sector, creating difficulties in making or receiving payments. We asked our correspondent in Abuja, Nigeria, Hugo Yuana, if this heralded a rocky start for the new president. Hugo, tell us, what is the situation?
Well, Asha, Nigeria's ruling party's candidate Bola Tinubu have been declared the winner of the presidential election. He's not going to find it easy. He's not going to be facing an easy task, because this is a newly elected president who finds himself struggling with multiple crises inherited from the 8 years rule of the outgoing president, Muhammadu Buhari. These challenges include a fiscal crisis, acute shortage of domestic and foreign currency, criminality, and extremism. A lot is at stake, including the gasoline subsidy that will drain $13 billion from the state's finances this year. The subsidy helps the citizens here to deal with the rising cost of running cars and powering their generator sets. The World Bank and the IMF have strongly advised an end to the payment. But these reforms will be hugely unpopular, especially with the wake of the cash crisis which we are having at the moment in Nigeria.
Hugo Yuana, our correspondent in Abuja. Thank you, Hugo. Zimbabwe has plenty of financial ingenuity. The southern African nation was cut off from the financial markets more than 20 years ago after multiple defaults and external debt of more than $13 billion. But it has now taken the lead. The aim is to restore investor confidence with the ambition of becoming a major offshore financial center on the continent. The country wants to offer a financial framework similar to Dubai or Mauritius, and as a first step, with its brand new stock exchange listed in foreign currencies opened in October. A year of tourism boom, this is what Kenya is anticipating for 2023, with a projection of over 2.5 million tourists. With Chinese groups leading the way, tourists have returned to Nairobi since last year, with arrivals up by 72% and 1.48 million visitors in 2022. The industry represents 10.4% of Kenya's GDP and employs 5.5% of its working population. In Morocco, industrialists are working to develop new varieties of couscous. We went to Casablanca to visit the CPI lab, a unique facility that allows researchers and manufacturers to test their pasta and couscous recipes on a miniature production line. This platform offers an opportunity to innovate on a very affordable budget, a chance for African cooperatives and companies to develop low-cost new products. Take a look.
From the edge of the Sahara to the north of the country, Moroccan women's cooperatives are beginning to emerge to produce and market quality homemade couscous. The North African dish, made from wheat semolina and sometimes barley, is a well-established tradition in the Maghreb countries. To the point, there is talk about the possibility of couscous one day being accepted by UNESCO's World Heritage Program.
It's the labeling that adds value and also maintains the authenticity of a product. And currently in Morocco, there is a couscous which is part of the traditions of the Sahrawi population. It's called the Komasi couscous. It benefits from a protected geographical status, a label which gives it added value from a commercial standpoint and makes it possible to keep up the product's traditional authenticity.
But the big challenge nowadays is to ensure this traditional dish meets hygiene standards, to enable it to be produced and marketed not only in bulk, but also in package form. It's also about being able to improve existing couscous recipes and to create new products.
In order for this sector to continue to survive, I think there is a need to be more competitive and better meet consumer demand to keep innovating. Through raw materials at first, through blends, through specific markets, the African market, for example, with certain raw materials.
With the help of the Canadian Ministry of Global Affairs, the IFIM, the Training Institute of Industrial Milling in Casablanca, offers a new tool intended for all the sector's entrepreneurs and cooperatives to test their products before launching major production. The CPI Lab provides a small-scale line of industrial production.
We decided to install this platform at IFIM, which would give the opportunity to industrial users, manufacturers, to have a platform for doing research and development, develop new products, whether it was testing new ingredients or maybe trying a blend of ingredients to make different types of couscous in Morocco or elsewhere in Africa or in the Mediterranean region.
The CPI lab behind me has exactly the same equipment as an industrial line. So, thanks to our supervision system, we can of course do our tests and alter all the numbers, all the parameters of our recipes, what we call the WE recipes, and directly place them as the template into the industrial process, making whatever adjustments are necessary, of course.
For African cooperatives that work using traditional methods, the small-scale production line means they can innovate in terms of blending cereals or vegetable produce, and also accelerate their industrialization. This is particularly true at a time when consumption is shifting away from bulk production in favor of finely manufactured products.
The essential added value of this platform, and this is the constant challenge, is to reproduce what is today done in a manual and traditional way by housewives in Africa. The principal interest is to be able to industrialize production that is currently the result of traditional labor.
And there's a major advantage with the ability to adapt each recipe to a different type of consumer, using only 300 kilos of raw material, instead of launching a full-scale test with an entire industrial line, which would be far more costly.
Soon I'll be in two markets, African and European, and it's two recipes, two different ways of doing things. So through IFIM's program, we can easily do these tests without having to change everything around and lose money in our factory.
Testing and innovating is what Morocco's industry leaders would like to encourage at a time when high, value-added and flavored couscous is becoming increasingly popular among consumers.
I have to admit, research and development is not yet as strong an instinct as it should be among our manufacturers. But we will be able to raise awareness about the importance of research and development, and to help expand their business units through visits we'll organize to countries that lead the way in innovation, especially Italy, especially France, and also Germany and Canada. It's to show them the importance of using research and development to make their business stand out from their national and international competitors, not just in terms of packaging or levels of pricing, but specifically at the level of innovation.
For Morocco, where the couscous market is already well developed, the CPI Lab offers manufacturers the opportunity to also modernize their pasta production. Indeed, pasta consumption is only 2 kilograms per year per capita, against more than 14 kilos in Tunisia. Moroccan manufacturers are now seemingly committed to increase pasta consumption in the kingdom. It's a dietary change that could be speeded up with the establishment of the Casablanca CPI lab in the fast-growing African and international market for pasta and couscous.
That's it for today. Business Africa is over. I'll see you next week, same time, same channel. For Initiative Africa, we'll host Menno Halterman, President of the industrial group Naira Saw Industries, who will discuss the challenges of water. In the meantime, you can catch this show again on our website, africaonair.com, and follow us on all our social media channels. Feel free to share, like, and comment using the hashtag Business Africa. Have a great week and see you next week. Bye-bye.